The Panama Canal isn't just a shortcut for ships, it's the backbone of global trade. But what happens when rising fees and alleged foreign control threaten America's economic advantage? Well, in this video, myself and my AI assistant Tiara will break down Trump's controversial ideas for reclaiming influence over the canal, why it matters to the US economy, and what it can mean for you, from shipping costs to everyday prices. And make sure you stick around because I'm also going to be uncovering the surprising ripple effects that can impact everything from global supply chains to diplomatic relations, and even your everyday life. So, Tiara, how should we start this one?
Let's make sure we're all on the same page about what Trump has said.
Fair point, as I feel like probably not everyone has really read all the comments that have been made. So Trump has repeatedly argued that when the US gave up direct control of the Panama Canal, it gave away a strategic and economic asset. So he's tied this concern to the idea that other countries, especially China, have gained too much influence over the canal, and he's suggested that rising fees and foreign operators could actually hurt American companies by driving up shipping costs and limiting access. Now, this view did gain some steam after he declared that charging US ships really high transit fees was just unfair, and that if those fees aren't cut, he might push for the canal to be placed under US management once again.
We're taking it back.
In his public comments on social media posts, Trump has even entertained the idea of using military or economic measures if that's what it takes to regain leverage over the canal's operations.
Panamanian.
That's not easy to say. Panamanian. Now, Panamanian officials responded sharply, calling those threats unfounded and insisting that the canal is run by their personnel alone. So for Trump supporters, this tough talk really resonates with those who feel that the US shouldn't really have probably walked away from such a vital waterway in the first place.
Because of the stupid administration.
However, critics argue that his stance disregards the treaty obligations that originally handed control to Panama, and they warn that renegotiating the canal's ownership would likely trigger major international conflicts. So as you can see, it's really a mixed bag, right? There are reasons where it may make sense and then other reasons why it doesn't. All right, so Tiara, what's next?
Let's discuss why the Panama Canal matters for the US economy.
Yeah, makes sense to me. We can go ahead and jump into there because I don't think that everyone really realizes how valuable it truly is.
Show me the money.
The Panama Canal is a critical piece of infrastructure for global trade, and its importance to the US economy, it really can't be overstated. So by connecting the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans through a 50-mile waterway, it provides a shortcut that saves ships literally thousands of miles and drastically reduces transit times. So for example, a ship traveling from the US East Coast to Asia can save about 3,000 miles by using the canal instead of sailing around South America's Cape Horn. And this efficiency, it translates into significant cost savings for shipping companies. So by avoiding, longer routes, vessels, they'll save on fuel and operating costs, which helps keep freight rates lower. And these savings, they really ripple through the entire supply chain, benefiting US businesses that rely on the canal to move goods like electronics, cars, and agricultural products quickly and affordably. Now, about 40% of US container traffic relies on the Panama Canal annually, making it a really, really vital place for American trade. The canal itself, it also plays a key role in global supply chains too. So it supports the movement of various types of cargo like dry bulk goods, chemicals, vehicles, and even refrigerated products. Its strategic location allows the US ports on both coasts to efficiently connect with trading partners in Asia, Europe, and Latin America. In fact, 6% of global maritime trade passes through its locks each year, which makes the canal indispensable for maintaining the competitiveness of US exports and imports. But as important as the Panama Canal is to the US economy, the importance of it goes far beyond the US itself. So Tiara, what should we focus on next here?
Let's get into the potential economic and political implications.
Agreed. Let's see just how vital the canal is on a, let's call it a global scale. So the Panama Canal really is a vital artery for global trade. Like I said just a minute ago, it handles 6% of all maritime commerce. And, for the US, it's a huge part of what we do at 40%. So if Trump were to pressure Panama into lowering fees or even attempt to take control, it could really disrupt the critical trade route. And here's what would likely happen in that scenario. So let's talk about shipping costs. So Panama charges fees based on ship size, cargo, and other factors, with some vessels paying hundreds of thousands of dollars per transit. Now, Trump has said that those fees are just too high and claimed that they unfairly charge US ships more than other countries.
How dare Panama charge fees for their own canal? Next thing you know, they'll want payment for using their airports too. The audacity.
Well, okay, TR. So the argument isn't that they're charging, it's actually that they're charging the US more than other countries. So, let's stick to critically thinking here. Anyway, if tensions escalate and Panama increases fees in retaliation, shipping costs could rise further, potentially, inflating consumer prices in the US entirely. Next, let's talk about the supply chain disruptions. So any conflict over the canal could lead to delays or blockages in transit, forcing ships to reroute around South America via the Cape of Good Hope or through the Suez Canal. These alternative routes are longer and they're going to be more expensive, which is going to add days or even weeks to delivery times and increase fuel costs. So for example, during past disruptions, freight rates jumped by hundreds of dollars per container, which would eventually be passed on to consumers, of course. And next, let's talk about the global trade shifts. So the canal's neutrality is guaranteed under international treaties, but a US takeover attempt might violate those agreements and destabilize trade relationships. Other nations that rely on the canal for exports, like China, could retaliate economically or politically, further complicating global trade. Now, on the political front, Trump's rhetoric has already caused tension between the US, Panama, and other countries. And of course, there's also going to be diplomatic strain. So Panama has firmly rejected Trump's claims about Chinese influence over the canal, with its president emphasizing that the waterway is fully under Panamanian control. Now, any attempt by the US to reclaim it would likely be seen as an infringement on Panama's sovereignty and could sour relations not only with Panama, but also with other Latin American nations. And there's also geopolitical risks. So Trump's focus on alleged, Chinese influence at the canal ties into broader concerns about Beijing's growing presence in Latin America. While Chinese companies operate ports near the canal, they do not control its operations. However, escalating tensions over this issue could deepen US-China rivalry in the region and lead to broader instability. And there'd also be plenty of legal challenges too. So the neutrality treaty signed with Panama guarantees that the canal remains open to all nations under Panamanian management. Now, in any US attempt to take control would likely breach this treaty and could lead to international legal disputes or even sanctions against the US. So all this being said, let's get into a hypothetical example about what could happen here if Trump got aggressive.
If you had one really violent day, like a guy like Congressman Kelly, put him in charge for one day.
So let's say Trump pressures Panama into lowering fees, but they refuse. In response, he imposes economic sanctions or threatens military action. This would spark backlash from Panama and its allies in Latin America, leading to higher tolls for US-bound ships as retaliation for the retaliation. Shipping companies reroute through longer paths, adding weeks to transit times and raising costs for goods like electronics or clothing. Meanwhile, diplomatic relations between the US and Latin America, they would deteriorate, making future trade negotiations more difficult. But again, this is hypothetical. There's always a chance that Trump pressures Panama and, they accommodate. We'll just have to see kind of what happens there. Speaking of hypotheticals, Tiara, what's next?
Let's jump into possible outcomes and consequences.
Perfect. That makes sense. So I like the idea of kind of focusing on consequences too, as I think it's going to help you understand, what we're really looking at here and kind of how this could play out, right, even further. So if Trump's ideas about the Panama Canal were to move forward, there are several possible outcomes, and each of those outcomes will have its own set of circumstances. So scenario one, Trump pressures Panama for lower fees, right? Trump could focus on using economic leverage to push Panama into reducing transit fees specifically for the US ships. Now, the US is the canal's largest user, with 73% of all ships passing through heading to or from American ports. So by threatening sanctions or cutting foreign aid, which we currently send them $3.8 billion annually, Trump might coerce Panama into offering discounts for the US-bound vessels.
I have the right to make a deal.
Consequences to that, if Panama agrees, is that it could lower shipping costs for American companies, potentially reducing prices on goods imported or exported through the canal. However, this approach, it does risk, straining US and Panama relations, and it could be seen as kind of like, economic bullying, undermining their trust in, US partnerships across Latin America as well. Now, if you ask me, it's a pretty solid outcome, especially considering we give them foreign aid already. Oh, come on, Timmy, don't you wake up right now. This kid. I have to go adjust my son. Now, scenario two would be a diplomatic standoff, right? So if Panama resists Trump's demands, a diplomatic standoff could ensue from there. Panama has already stated that the canal's sovereignty is non-negotiable, and its president has dismissed Trump's claims about Chinese interference as completely baseless. So in this case, Panama might retaliate by increasing fees or limiting access for American ships. Now, the consequences of that, well, higher fees or restricted access would raise shipping costs for US businesses, which would potentially lead to increased prices for consumers consumers. Additionally, a standoff could disrupt trade routes and cause delays in global supply chains, which would affect industries like manufacturing and retail. So scenario 3 is military intervention. I'm gonna be the first to say here, I don't love the idea, but Trump has refused to rule out military action to reclaim the canal.
America, yeah, coming again to save the motherfucking day, yeah.
Citing its strategic importance and concerns over China's influence in the region. Now, while this is definitely an extreme scenario, it absolutely remains a possibility.
Ah, yes. The perfect way to win friends and influence nations. Threaten military action over a glorified shipping shortcut.
Yeah, that's kind of why I'm against it too. You know, I see the importance of it, but I just don't think that military action is, really the right move, to be honest. Now, in terms of consequences, a military intervention would likely violate international law under the Neutrality Treaty and severely damage America's reputation globally. It could also destabilize Latin America and provoke backlash from other nations, including China, which is the canal's second largest user after the US. Domestically, such a move would be highly controversial and would divide people even further with their politics, so not a fan of that either. Scenario 4 is status quo with escalating tensions. So if neither side backs down, but no drastic actions are taken, tensions between the US and Panama could escalate without immediate resolution. This might involve ongoing disputes over fees and management, but no significant changes in control of the canal. Now, consequences of that, well, there's gonna be prolonged uncertainty, which could make shipping companies kind of weary of relying on the canal, prompting some to, explore alternative routes like the Suez Canal or Arctic shipping lanes, which was actually talked about a lot in another video that I did that I'll share in just a minute about what would happen if the US bought Greenland. But this shift could increase costs and it would reduce efficiency in global trade. So what is the impact on ordinary Americans? Well, most of these scenarios could translate into higher prices for goods due to increased shipping costs or delays in supply chains. So for example, electronics imported from Asia might take longer to arrive or cost more due to rerouted shipments. Agricultural products from the Midwest, they might face higher transportation fees, making them less competitive in global markets. And retailers might experience inventory shortages if goods are delayed in transit. So ultimately, any disruption to the Panama Canal, whether it's economic or political, it would ripple through the global trade system and affect consumers at home. But let's just hope that Panama works with the US and, they just lower the fees to reduce the prices. But of course, we're gonna see what happens. And by the way, here's that video that I mentioned right here that explains what would happen if buying Greenland could boost the US economy. And if that's not for you, go ahead and check out the other video over here instead. But before you go, please remember to subscribe to the channel to unlock financial success one AI chat at a time. Thanks for watching.